Hi everyone, I thought I'd give a tour of my Satisfactory factory. Before I start, apologies about the frame rate, it's not ideal. While it's recording, it reduces my frame rate a fair amount. Usually it's much more playable than the 37 FPS it's showing at the moment, but it's okay for the video. Hopefully you'll be able to put up with it. I am running it in 4K, so it is, and on Linux, which makes it a bit slower than it normally would be. I could reduce the quality to 1080p, but I think it looks nicer in 4K, so I'm going to keep that and put up with the slower frame rate while it's recording. So with that said, I'll give you a quick tour of my factory. So look around, you can probably get an idea of the scale. You can see I've got stuff over there. There's also loads of stuff that way. You can see I've got bits and pieces all over the place. This is my main base, so I've got my hub, equipment workshop and MAM here. I've also got a storage container of stuff that I've found useful, so there's hard drives and things in here which I can't scan yet because I've run out of stuff to scan. But I've also got a recycling centre, so that's operations there. I've then got a recycling centre here with all my sinks. That container there just feeds anything I put into it directly into a sink. And you can see it's quite a nice, clean, clinical setup. There's very little here on my Skybase. There's no conveyors or anything in the way. I'll come to that in a moment. I've just got a nice, large, flat area. You can see here I've got a set of containers. The idea here is to have an industrial container for every item in the game. So that's what I intend to do eventually. I'm not there yet. I've only just got to aluminium. So starting at this end, we've got the most basic items. So I've got my iron stuff, then some copper, then engine parts and motors and modular frames. Each one of these is full. And I've got all my different parts. So I've got black powder, dynamite, rifle cartridges, fuel, plastics and so on. I've got computers and oscillators. I don't know if that's full because they're made so slow, but I don't need that many of them anyway. And I've got my aluminium stuff, which is the last thing I've finished. I don't yet have supercomputers or turbo motors being made automatically. That's going to be my next task. But you can see I've got the heat sinks and I've got the aluminium sheets, and these I'm making these at 240 a minute, so a lot faster than I can possibly use them. You might be wondering where the stuff is coming from to fill these, because there's obviously no conveyors about here. You can probably just about see through the glass. You can probably just about see through the glass that there's a load of conveyors at the bottom. Everything is fed from below. So all of these containers are fed from below. It is a bit messy down here. This is something I want to tidy up at some point. It's not perfect. I've got rows and rows of conveyors all feeding into the various different parts of this assembly. It's not too messy, as you can see, but it's not ideal either. So lots of different stuff being fed in and then it's sorted into the various containers. So it's not terrible, but it's also not perfect, and I do want to spend some time tidying this up at some point. But for now, that's okay. And you might be wondering what these conveyors sending the stuff up is doing. Well, obviously the conveyors sending stuff into the containers, that's the fuel one, is sending stuff into this container, and then it goes out of the container up to here. Now this is a bit of a mess because I've just built it on an ad hoc basis, but you can see I've got my space elevator there. For the space elevator, what I do is I just build assemblers and constructors and whatever on this platform to build stuff for the space elevator as and when I've needed it, because it obviously has access to a pretty much infinite supply of any material that it needs. So where's all the stuff coming from? Well, you can see I've got a lot of things around. It's all fairly spaced out because what I've tended to do was build stuff at the nodes and then ship it back on conveyors. So a long way in the distance over there, you can see my steel production, and over here is my iron production. You can kind of get an idea of how complex my factory is with the different layers from here, but we'll go and explore one of these and I'll show you how it works. There are parts I haven't yet replaced with glass. I did go through and get rid of most of the paneling, but the older stuff like iron is still done on the solid foundations instead of glass. Anything I've done more recently is glass, but it's just such a big job to go through and change every block into glass. I haven't got around to doing that yet. It is on my to-do list. Whether I'll ever bother, I don't know. But I'll show you how my factory works. I use a 3-tier system. This top layer is just for buildings. There's no conveyors on this top layer at all. There's nothing that gets in my way of just running about on the top here or driving about if I've got a vehicle. The whole point is this is only for buildings. The buildings are fed from below, as you can see. So whatever the building needs is fed from below. So I use a conveyor that comes up and then feeds the various buildings from below. In fact, that's the output, isn't it? So the buildings are actually, the assembly is actually being fed from this side, from below. So it's staying in the concrete and the steel tubes to be made into encased blocks. So they're fed from below, and then the product that is made is then shipped back below and then sent to wherever it needs to be. In this case, it's being sent over to my storage area. And I've got a few different places here that are making those blocks. I still got a 3-tier system. There's this tier here that I'm on at the moment, which is the logistics tier, which is where all the conveyor belts are, where everything gets sent, either shipped to or from the buildings. And I've got the top tier, which is my buildings layer. So what's the middle tier? Well, I found the power cables to look ugly, and having power cables everywhere in the base is just really not very aesthetically pleasing because you get cables everywhere. So what I do is I build a power pole for each building directly below it and then power the building from below. So there is actually a cable going from this power pole to this building here, and each building has its own power pole, which means that the cables are hidden because the cable is just going from there to there and so on. So each building's got the same thing, a power pole directly below. So my 3 layers are the logistics layer with the conveyor belts, the power layer and the buildings layer, and that keeps things really nice and neat. And you can see I've kept with this throughout. So over here where I've got my oil production, if we quickly fly across, where I've got my oil production, I'm using the same approach. So I've got my buildings layer, power layer, and then logistics layer where everything gets fed in. And you can see it looks quite nice down here where you've got all the different conveyors being joined together and so on. You really have to be careful with this and do a lot of maths to work out that you're not maxing out or starving buildings. So there's quite a lot of mathematics gone into here to make sure that none of the buildings are starved and the conveyors can actually handle the amount they need to ship to each of the different buildings, and that did take a long while to work out. And again, apologies for the frame rate here, it's not usually this bad, it's only because I'm recording. So I've got the same thing. Oh, that cable's not very neat, I might redo that at some point, but you can see they're getting fed with the iron. What I don't have at the moment, which is on my to-do list, is to send anything that isn't being used to a sink. I've got that for some stuff, but not for others. So this iron is actually paused at the moment because the containers are full. As soon as I remove something from those storage containers up there, it will get built and then sent into the container. And the way these containers work is most of them are on smart splitters. So here's where my modular frames are coming down, and they get sent to the relevant container. And all of my stuff works like this. There's a smart splitter somewhere that says send to the container, but if the container's full, so star is the center output here, which sends it off to the container, and then my left output is overflow, which means if the container's full and this is backed up to here, any additional modular frames will now get sent down this way, and they'll get shipped to whatever I've got up here, which then builds them into heavy modular frames, so they get automatically shipped to these manufacturers, which I think are then building the heavy encased frames. And you can see they're being fed from below as well. The manufacturer is a bit more difficult because you've got 4 inputs. So where there's 4 inputs, I have 2 on one side and 2 on the other. So this one's coming down and being fed from what is the left from this angle, and this one's being fed from the right. So the encased frames are being fed in from the right, the concrete's been fed in from the left, and then slightly higher up on the next conveyor layer we feed in the steel pipes from this side, and then the encased beams from this side to feed the manufacturer. And I've just got 2 conveyors that go all the way up and feed the various machines. And that's basically how my factory works. I've got the 3 layers and the priority system that says fill the container in the main base first. If the container in the main base is full, then go and use that material to build something else. And that happens for everything. So if I start taking iron rods out of here, it will stop temporarily screws being made, for example, because all the rods will be made into rods rather than screws. If I take screws out of here, it will stop making reinforced plates because they're being made to be screws. But as soon as these storage containers are full, it then uses the additional resources to make the next thing in the chain. So once screws is full, it will then start using the additional screws to make reinforced plates. Once reinforced plates are full, it will then use those reinforced plates to make the modular frames, and so on. And it does that throughout my factory. That's how my factory works. Prioritize filling these containers. If the containers are full, then use the material for something else. And that is basically the overview of how my factory works. I'll do another video on power, and I want to show you something in particular. You can see a teaser of it here. I've got a lot of water pipes coming down this waterfall. That's something I'm quite proud of, and I'll show you in detail in a moment. So I thought I'd give you an overview of the base on the map as well. Here is my main base. This is the part that you just saw me walking around at the moment. I've only actually on preview just walked around this small area. There's a few different areas that I showed you. That's my iron production there that I just walked around. This is my steel production. I've also got another steel production here actually. I've got 2 sets of steel production. This one makes beams and this one makes rods or whatever they're called. Steel pipes, I think they're called. This one makes the pipes and this one makes the beams. So I've got 2 sets of steel production. This block here is actually coal power, which I will show you in the next video. This one here is turbo fuel. So this here is actually buildings for just one node. So that entire block there is just one node of oil. I intend to do another node of oil. Actually, that's not quite true. This side of the walkway is one building's worth of oil, one node's worth of oil. This one's a smaller one. It was my test to start with. So that's one node and that's another node. I'm going to eventually make it so that there's another node. And this is my turbo fuel and fuel generators. So that block there is all fuel generators. This is my aluminium production, which I will show you in a bit. And if I scroll up, this part here is making my compacted coal for the turbo fuel, which then gets shipped all the way down here on conveyor belts. So I've got conveyor belts that ship the compacted coal all the way down. I won't show you the compacted coal, and also there's another bit that's also compacted coal. So I'm making, I think, 1600 compacted coal at the moment, and shipping it all the way down to here, ready to have 4 nodes worth of turbo fuel. I think at the moment I've got enough for 3 nodes worth of turbo fuel, and I need to add a few more buildings and replace the level 4 conveyors with level 5 conveyors, and then I'll have enough compacted coal from these 2 sites to make turbo fuel. If I put the coal on the map, you can see I'm using the coal from here and the sulfur as well. If I put the sulfur on and the coal on, you can get an idea of which coal and sulfur I'm using. So I'm using these 2 sulfurs here and this one here to do my compacted coal.